Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out today. I'm Jenna Story, and on behalf of the Tocqueville program and the Department of Politics and International Affairs, I'd like to welcome you to this lecture. Please remember to turn off your cell phones before we begin. Today's lecture by Dr. Arthur Brooks is co-sponsored by the Tocqueville program, the Department of Politics and International Affairs, the American Enterprise Institute Executive Council, the College Republicans, and the College Democrats. That such groups can come together in the support of an event like this one is a good sign. Itself, it's an important testimony to the culture of open and honest conversation that exists on Furman's campus, the kind of conversation that necessarily crosses partisan divides of all kinds. The Tocqueville program's primary aim is to help sustain this culture of conversation by supporting an intellectual community of students and faculty devoted to seeking the truth about the moral and philosophic questions that we find at the heart of political life. Students involved in our extracurricular groups come together to discuss things from the widest possible variety of political, religious, and philosophic perspectives. Our students help us host the country's very best scholars and public intellectuals so that we can bring to Furman's campus the most thoughtful and compelling arguments for diverse and competing points of view. On behalf of the Tocqueville program, I'd like to take this occasion of our 10th anniversary to thank Furman, its students, its faculty, its administration, and our department for being such a rewarding place in which to do this work. I'd particularly like to thank Dr. Elizabeth Davis, president of Furman University, for her consistent leadership, her support for our program, and for graciously agreeing to introduce tonight's speaker. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Elizabeth Davis.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for this celebration of the first decade of Furman's Tocqueville program. In its dedication to investigating questions that cross boundaries of our partisan divisions, this program exemplifies Furman's commitment as a liberal arts institution to follow the truth wherever it leads. In its commitment to fostering intellectual community and to mentoring our students, it also exemplifies the promise of the Furman Advantage to help young people discover how they might craft lives of fulfillment and purpose. We're grateful to the many donors and supporters who sustain the work of the Tocqueville program. Dr. Ben Story recognized all of the donors in a reception earlier, but I would like to provide my own thanks to founding donors Jenny and Sandy McNeil, lecture series sponsors Beth and Ravenel Curry, and Emeritus Trustee Bill Howes. I'm also pleased to recognize some additional members of Furman's Board of Trustees who are with us here today, Gordon and his wife Sarah Herring and Dave Ellison. This afternoon, we're in for a treat. Our speaker, Dr. Arthur C. Brooks, is president of the American Enterprise Institute, where he is also the Beth and Ravenel Curry Scholar in Free Enterprise. After an extraordinarily successful decade as the head of AEI, he will depart next year to take up a professorship in Harvard's Kennedy School of Government and a senior fellowship at the Harvard Business School. As many of you well know, Dr. Brooks is a prolific author. He is a contributing opinion writer for the New York Times and has written 11 books, including the recent bestseller, The Conservative Heart: How to Build a Fairer, Happier, and More Prosperous America. In 2016, Fortune magazine featured him in its annual list of great leaders, recognizing him as the 32nd most influential person in the world. I know, it's pretty good. Just saying. Dr. Brooks's influence seems to come in part from his determination to take on the uphill battle. For the last decade or so, he has worked tirelessly to change the way that Republicans typically think about poverty. His work has won the respect of national and world leaders, including President Barack Obama and the Dalai Lama, who, in fact, Brooks regularly speaks with about human dignity, work, and happiness. In his upcoming book, Love Your Enemies, How Decent People Can Save America from a Culture of Contempt. Dr. Brooks will attempt to help our country overcome its increasingly bitter divisions. We're particularly glad to note that Dr. Brooks' lead research assistant on this book has been Furman class of 2016 standout Nathan Thompson. Nathan, where are you? We're so glad to have you back on campus. Great to see you. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brooks, who this afternoon will share with us his thoughts on bringing America together.
Thank you, President Davis, for those incredibly gracious remarks. I'm really grateful to all of you for coming, and especially to the Tocqueville program, to Jenna and Ben Story, who have made a phenomenal program that's famous all around the United States, and it's creating an example of how conversations between people who disagree are possible at universities. This is a standout place, a place I'm delighted to be. You heard before that my research assistant, my colleague, Nathan Thompson, is one of your fellow graduates, those of you who are students. It's great. I mean, the people who come out of here are well known for being excellent. My own academic background is a little different. You got sort of the cleaned up version of my bio just now. I would have loved to have gone to Furman University. I didn't. I actually went to 1 year of college and got tossed out. Kicked out. Splitting hairs at this point. And I went on the road as a professional classical musician. So I've had an unusual path. I wound up coming back to college when I was 28 and graduated with my bachelor's degree by correspondence 1 month before my 30th birthday. So I have a different background than a lot of you. But that notwithstanding, there's a lot of things that bring us all together, a common path, a common set of goals that I want to talk about today. Because no matter where you started or where you're going, you live in a country that needs to stand together in a world that's fractured. And I want to talk about how maybe we can do that. I want to give you a couple of ideas that I have that maybe can help you be a leader in a country that needs to come together, in my view. And I don't really care what your politics are, whether you're left or right or nothing. I think that these are all things that we can agree on, and I'm really honored to be able to share these ideas with you. Now, you heard a minute ago that I'm the president of a think tank. For those of you who don't know what that is, it's like a university without students, but it's a laboratory for ideas to look at the biggest problems in the world and try to think about solutions in new ways. It's all about thinking about old problems in new ways. Now, it's a tricky thing to do, but you know perfectly that when you have a big problem, if you think about it harder in the old way, you won't solve the problem. You need a breakthrough. All of you can think of examples of this from your own life. From your student life, or your business life, or your work life, or your family life. I can think of one, I was thinking of an example of just this, a new breakthrough kind of thinking, just in my own family life. See, I've got 3 kids, 20, 18, and 15. And my middle son, his name is Carlos, and he struggled a little bit in high school. He wasn't serious about his classes, and there was always a grades problem that we were always worrying about. And a couple of years ago, my wife Esther and I, we were at a parent-teacher conference that was going very, very badly. It was, he's not living up to his potential, his grades aren't good enough, and it was very stressful. I got to tell you, I mean, some of you did that to your parents, and you should call them up and say you're sorry. And on the way home, it was very tense, and we weren't talking. And finally, my wife, who's an optimist, she's Spanish, and she says, we're thinking about this problem in the wrong way. We need to think in a new way. And I said, I'm all ears, sweetheart. She said, at least we know he's not cheating. So that's the spirit in which I want to take on a big problem in America today. The big problem that we're really all suffering from in this country, I dare say. And that's the state of the way that we disagree about politics. Now, again, I got to reiterate, I don't really care what your politics are, whether you agree with me or don't. I think you all will agree with this statement. We don't know how to disagree very well in this country. It's extraordinary. When we're going through the last presidential campaign and we had the presidential debates, I was with my teenage daughter, and I remember saying, sweetheart, remember that these are not our values the way these people are talking to each other. These are presidential candidates. And I say that these are not consistent with our family values in the way that they talk to each other. I know most of you, probably all of you, agree with me, but what we don't know is how do you fix it? How can you actually make it better? There's hatred. There's disrespect. We see it all around us, not just in political debates. You turn on the television during prime time, cable TV, you see it. You go into the dark pit of social media and talk about politics, you see it. Maybe some of you have seen it around your Thanksgiving table. It's weird because it reminds me a little bit of dialogue between people who used to be in love and now aren't, and they hate each other. It's especially bitter when you go toe to toe on something with somebody who really owes you respect and from whom you're not getting it, right? So I need a new way of thinking about this problem. Again, I'm the president of a think tank. I got to think differently about this problem. So I was in search of a new way of thinking about this. Look, I'm in the heart of Washington, D.C. We have politicians coming through the operation constantly. I have to be able to say something that's different. And I was listening to or reading the work of a social psychologist that I really admire a lot. His name is John Gottman. He teaches at the University of Washington in Seattle. And the reason I was thinking about this guy, I was getting ready to interview him for a podcast that I do. But the reason I was thinking about him is because he's the world's leading expert in marital reconciliation. And I thought, maybe that's the right metaphor for America. Like, look, we love this country. We should love each other. How do we get back together again? So I'm looking at his work, and he's kind of amazing. He's got this thing called the Gottman Marriage Laboratory. He runs it with his wife, Julie. And it's amazing. They brought thousands of couples together that are on their way to divorce court. He's got the magic. He's got all the secrets. And so I'm looking at his work, and John Gottman has this trick where he can actually talk to a couple, just a little bit of counseling that's having trouble. They're quarreling. They're not getting along. Ask them a series of basic questions over the course of an hour, but then look at the video of that interaction with the sound turned off. And just looking at them, he can predict if they will be divorced within 3 years with 97% accuracy. So, how many of you are married? Many of you will be. You want to know what he was looking for, don't you? You need to know what he was looking for, as a matter of fact. Eye rolling. The universal sign of contempt. Now, why is this important? Because you hear all the time that America is angry, that the politics are angry, people screaming at each other, right? It's all anger, right? Wrong. It's not anger. See, here's the deal about anger. Anger in a marriage is uncorrelated with separation and divorce. Thank God, because as I mentioned, my wife is Spanish. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of arguing. I've had 10,000 arguments over the past 27 years of my marriage. None of it threatens the marriage because anger doesn't. Anger says, I care. I want to fix something. It leads to reconciliation naturally. The problem is not anger. It's when you take anger and you mix in disgust. And it's like taking bleach, right, and putting in ammonia. And it forms a toxic gas that can kill a marriage. That leads to contempt. Contempt is defined as the conviction of the utter worthlessness of another person. Have you ever been treated with contempt? Where you say something and somebody rolls their eyes at you? That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. What you just said is not worth hearing. You never quite forget it, do you? Somebody treats you with contempt. Anger, okay. Contempt, not okay. When somebody who owes you respect, who owes you even love, treats you with contempt, you won't forget it. That's the best way to get a permanent enemy, is to treat somebody with contempt. Dismissiveness, sarcasm, derision. The idea of the snarky answers that you see that dominate social media. Social media, Twitter is a contempt machine, for all intents and purposes. That's the reason it gets so bitter so fast. The anonymity of our culture leads to contempt all over the place. And this is the light bulb going off for me. The solution in America is not to stop disagreement because disagreement is good. It's to stop the contempt because the contempt is what's tearing us apart. That's the challenge. How do you solve contempt. Now, conventional thinking, by the way, you hear this all the time. You know what's the problem in American politics? We need more civility. We need more tolerance. That's wrong. Civility and tolerance are garbage standards. If I tell you, you say, how's your marriage? I say, well, Esther and I, we're civil to each other. It's like, yeah, you guys need some counseling. Or if I tell you, I'm president of AEI, my employees tolerate me. That's bad. That's bad. I'm going to have a lot of turnover under those circumstances. Civility and tolerance are not good enough. In a country that needs more, we should abandon those standards. So what do we need? We need to come back together around love, because that's what we owe each other. How do we do that? That's what I'm thinking about. That's what I want to present to you. Now, the whole problem came to me in kind of an epiphany. So I do a lot of public speaking. I do 150, 175 speeches a year. That's what I do for a living. So when you're the president of a think tank, there's almost no thinking in tanks. It's traveling on airplanes and asking people for contributions. And it's, by the way, it's a great life. Because I get to talk to smart people like you about ideas that can help our country. And I love that, and I'm grateful for that. And I talk to all different sorts of audiences. I go to progressive universities and conservative activists and business groups and everybody in between. I talk to people all across the political spectrum. In 2014, in a speech I was giving in New Hampshire was for 600 conservative activists. I mean, super fired up, three-cornered hats, the whole deal. And I was the only non-presidential candidate on the docket. One person running for president after another. It was Ted Cruz and Scott Walker and Donald Trump and one after the other. And I was the only non-presidential candidate on the lineup. Now, right in the middle. I don't know why I got an invitation. But as I was backstage, I showed up a little bit early to listen. I thought, what am I supposed to do? Because these presidential candidates, I know what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to fire these guys up big time. Get them just hooting and hollering. And basically their job is to go out there and say, you know what? You're right. Well, that's not my job. That's not my job at all. My job is to make things better. My job is to improve the way that people think. I believe that's why God put me there. Okay? So I thought, how am I going to do that? So I practiced a little line. And here's what it was. I said in the middle of my talk, I stopped and I said, look, we're talking about economics and foreign policy and all this. And frankly, my politics kind of tend center-right, so we probably agree. But I want you to remember, I said to the audience, I want you to remember the people who are not here and who don't agree with us. There are progressive brothers and sisters. And I want you to remember something. They're not stupid and they're not evil. They're just Americans who don't agree with us. Now, I knew it wasn't going to be an applause line. But here's what happened. A lady, she said, she's not being mean, she's just being kind of funny. She says, I think they're stupid and evil. And at that moment, and I didn't take offense because she was just making a joke, right? But it was a contemptuous joke, right? It was dismissive, is to say, they're worthless. And at that moment, you know what I thought? I thought about Seattle. Why? Because it's my hometown. I just told you what my politics are, right? My dad was a college professor. My mother was an artist. What do you think their politics were? It's a question that answers itself in America today. And I can tell you one thing, they're not stupid and they're not evil. My brother and I were very close. We differ on politics. It doesn't matter. Question. I'm going to ask all of you a question. And I'm only ask for a show of hands one time tonight. How many of you love somebody with whom you disagree politically? Thank God that's 100%. Look, that's America. That's the way it's supposed to be. You're being told by powerful people in media and in politics and entertainment and on college campuses that the people with whom you disagree are stupid and evil, and you should disassociate yourself from them. That person is insulting your sister-in-law or your mom or your aunt. they're insulting somebody that you actually love. See, it's funny, my dad used to tell me that the mark of the moral worth of somebody, the courage of somebody, is to stand up to the people you agree with on behalf of people with whom you disagree. It's the truth, isn't it? When is the last time you did it? When some yahoo who doesn't even know you told you that your mother is stupid and evil. It's not right. You need to stand up. And not just for your mom, but for the people you might not even like very much, but who disagree with you, but who need your respect and who deserve your support because they are also Americans just like you. They're also brothers and sisters of yours because they're people, because they're human beings. See, that's what we have to do, right? That's how we bring America together. This is the central insight, is standing up to haters on our side. I can stand up to haters on the other side. I got no credibility. But on my side, that's power. Because I'm a leader, and so are you. If you're not quite a leader yet, you will be. Practice this, because you'll be more powerful. And you'll be doing what you're supposed to do. Okay, now quick question. Why do we treat each other with contempt? I bet if you're like me, you can think of a time when you did it. If you're on social media at all, I bet you can imagine yourself doing it within the last 24 hours. Why do we do that? Psychologists will tell you it's not because we're bad people and not because we want to, but because we have a habit of talking to each other in this way. We have a habit of communicating in a contemptuous way because that's kind of the culture. That's the water that we're swimming in. And it's easy to do that. You hear something stupid and you roll your eyes. You say, when you're anonymous on social media, you go to the extreme more than you ever would in person. That's the contemptuous habit of the age in the way that we communicate with one another. So how do you break the habit? How do you break a habit? There's a good and growing body of neuroscience that actually takes this up. How do you break habits? It's very important because in the world of addiction medicine, you have to break habits. And it turns out, really the frontier of neuropsychology helps us understand that habits are formed in a part of the brain called the nucleus accumbens. The nucleus accumbens is a very ancient part of the brain. It bypasses the prefrontal cortex, this big thing behind your forehead that gives you your personality, that makes you you, that said, I think I'm going to go to that lecture by that guy from Washington, D.C. in the blue suit today. That was your prefrontal cortex. But your nucleus accumbens is an ancient part of your brain. And it bypasses your conscious ideas to go right to your reward center. That's how you get addicted to stuff. Because your nucleus accumbens says, do this, you'll feel good. And the more you do it, the more it reinforces that part of your brain, and the harder it is to break a habit. Okay, so how do you break a habit? You have to retrain the nucleus accumbens. And the way that you do that is by substituting one behavior for the bad behavior. What I'm saying is, I can't just say, hey, Nathan, stop smoking. Right? He doesn't smoke, by the way, as far as I know. I say, stop smoking, because that's appealing to his prefrontal cortex. I need to say, every time you want to smoke, do something else. By the way, this is not a trivial example. I was a musician for a long time. I smoked cigarettes. I hated it. It was embarrassing. It made my mother sad. It was expensive. It smelled rotten. I had to quit. Couldn't quit. Answer was, do something different. Every time I want a cigarette, do something different. So I took up drinking. All right, so we have a habit of contemptuous communication. What are we going to do? The answer is, you need to do something every time you want to treat somebody with contempt. You need to do something different. What do we do? Okay, I got the answer. I got the answer from somebody you heard about a minute ago. His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The weirdest, most beautiful friendship I've got in my life is a 7-year relationship, working friendship with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He lives in Dharamsala in the Himalayan foothills in India. Now, His Holiness the Dalai Lama is a really interesting guy, the most compassionate person I've ever met. And we were 2 years ago shooting a documentary film, which is about to come out in a couple of months, called The Pursuit, by the way. And we were shooting this film together in his home, in his monastery. And between takes, I was thinking about this contempt problem. I knew I had to do something else. So I said, he's wise. I mean, this is the Dalai Lama, right? The head of the most prominent Buddhist in the world's most respected religious figure, as a matter of fact. I said, Your Holiness, what should I do when I feel contempt? And he said, when you feel contempt, you should practice warm-heartedness. And I said, you got anything else? Because, that seems kind of weak, right? That seems like an aphorism. And I thought about it. It's not weak. See, here's the deal. The Dalai Lama practices this. And for those of you who don't know, the Dalai Lama is a Tibetan. He is the head of the Tibetan Buddhist faith, but he's also the leader of the Tibetan people. The Tibetan people were forced into exile. The leadership of the Tibetan people were forced into exile by the communist Chinese in the late 1950s. He was the leader as a teenager at that point and led his people into exile, to be gone and forgotten and disappeared because they're poor, because they're pacifists, because they have no power. That's the way the world works. Powerful people drive people without power into exile to be forgotten. And what happened over the next 6 decades? The cause of Tibet has only grown because of the force of compassion of the Dalai Lama. Because the contempt that he's shown by the communist Chinese is answered by him with warm-heartedness. He told me he starts every day praying for the Chinese leaders. Not that they will give him his homeland back, but they'll live good and happy lives. That, my friends, is not weakness. That's strength. Question for you. Are you strong enough to answer contempt with warm-heartedness? Are you tough enough? Or are you weak and you're going to answer contempt with contempt? See, this is your opportunity, isn't it? But it's tough. So he told me that. I said, yeah, got it. How? How do I do that? I'm a weak man. I'm treated with contempt all the time. I'm in the public eye. I have a public job. I talk about politics. I live in Washington. It's bad. What do I do when I'm treated with contempt? How do I answer with warm-heartedness? Give me a tip. Give me a hack, Your Holiness. He said this, remember a time when you accidentally did it and how it made you feel? And then remember that feeling, and it'll come naturally. So I went back to my little room, because I have a little room that I stay in when I'm in Dharamsala, a little Tibetan room. It's beautiful. And I meditated on this, and I prayed about it. And I remembered a time when I accidentally answered contempt with warm-heartedness. And I want to tell you about it, not because I want you to use my experience, but because I want you to remember your experience. The year was 2006, and I was still a professor at Syracuse University. Taught at Syracuse for a long time, and I had the best life ever. I was beavering away in professorial obscurity. I had great students, and I wrote my books, which were interesting to me and no one else. And I would write book after book, and nobody ever read them, but life was sweet. And then one day, my life accidentally changed. See, I wrote this book. My main area of research was the economics of charitable giving. Like, yeah, I know, snore. And I wrote a book about it called Who Really Cares? And it talked about the difference between people who give to charity and people who think they give to charity. And it's not the same people. And the president said something about it. And it started selling hundreds of copies a day. And I was on TV every day, and my life changed. This happens to academics. It happens to professors in a wonderful place like Furman University. A professor's life can be turned upside down because suddenly the attention of the world turns to his or her research agenda just for a second. And I was on the radio, and I was in the newspaper, and truthfully, my life has never been the same ever since then. Here's the weird part about that experience. I started hearing from people I'd never met. And I never had this. I mean, I never had strangers sending me emails, and never. But I started to get hundreds of emails from people. See, when you have a book that's a bestseller, I learned this. People read your book, and they think they know you, and they want to share. Since they know you, they want you to know them. And so they send you an email with very personal details. I want to tell you about my grandma. I was like, I don't know you, but I do. It's weird. So 2 weeks after the book comes out, by the way, positive and negative. They don't like the book, they're going to tell you about it in no uncertain terms. 2 weeks after the book comes out, I get an email from a guy in Texas. Dear Professor Brooks, you are a right-wing fraud. That's a very unpromising start to an email. Keep reading. Reading on. Turns out this thing is 5,000 words long. It's going to take me 20 minutes to read this guy's email. But I'm a good sport because I read people's emails the right thing. My mother raised me to read people's letters. So I'm reading through the email, and it turns out this guy is going through chapter and verse, every detail in my book in vitriolic detail. Like, the columns in table 3.1 are reversed, you moron. Stuff like that, right? And I'm like, but I mean, you know what was going through my head as I read that email? I'm 2/3 of the way through, and I'm conscious that this thought keeps going through my head over and over and over again. You know what it is? He read my book. I was blown away, because nobody had ever read my book before. I don't think my wife ever read my books before. I mean, I wouldn't have read my books. This guy read my book, every word. And I was filled with gratitude. So I thought to myself, I'm going to tell him. I got nothing to lose. I've never heard this guy. I'd probably never meet him. So I wrote him this email, and I said, I realize you think I'm terrible, and you think I'm a stooge, and I'm awful, and a bad person. But it took me 2 years to write that book, and I put my whole heart into it, and you read every word. I am so grateful to you for that. Thank you. Send. And then I go back to work, right? And I'm thinking, I wonder if that's just going to make that guy mad. I don't know, right? 15 minutes later, bing, email comes up from the guy. Next time you're in Dallas, if you want to get some dinner, give me a call. What's up with that? I had magic, powers. It was amazing. I had turned that guy from an enemy into a friend with just a few words of compassion, of warm-heartedness, of gratitude, because I felt actual gratitude toward that guy. Now, by the way, I did not ever call him and have dinner with him, because if I had, I would probably be, handcuffed to a pipe in his basement right now or something weird. I don't know, right? Sorry, that's like a really dark joke. But anyway, but it was amazing to me, because that was the memory that I had, the Dalai Lama. Remember, I was like, yeah, wow, yeah. I answered contempt with warm-heartedness, and it changed 2 hearts. Now, you might ask yourself, what if the guy's still a jerk? What if the guy's like, I hate you more? Possible. It still changed 1 heart, mine. See, I have a choice. Contempt, I can answer with contempt, and my heart is hard. Contempt, I answer with kindness and respect. No, with love. I just changed my heart, and maybe his. That's in your power, starting today. And that's the secret. That's a cultural change, my friends. That's a social movement. How? I need to give you some homework on how to do this. Because if you agree with me, and even if you don't, you might want to try this, I'm going to give you 3 assignments. And if you do these things, I'm completely convinced that we're going to start a social movement together. Ready? All right. Some of you are taking notes, which I appreciate. I know you have to do it for credit, but still. Assignment number 1, to put this into practice. Ready? Refuse to be used. Stand up to the man. Who is trying to drive you into a frenzy of hate against the other side politically? Somebody who has an interest in it to become more famous and powerful and rich. That's the answer. So what I want you to do is I want you to get into your head somebody, some national person in media or in politics, someplace, or just in authority, maybe it's in someplace in authority in your life, who wants you to think that the other side is stupid and evil. Okay, you got that person in your head? Well, that's wrong. That's the wrong person. Why? Because you just got into your head somebody that you disagree with and that you think is bad on the other side. Try again. Think of somebody on your side who's telling you that your favorite columnist, right? The person you watch on TV, the person you follow on social media, whether that person is famous or not. That person is getting you more angry. That's scratching an itch. It's stimulating dopamine in your brain, the same way that drugs and alcohol do. That person is manipulating you. Do you like it? In that moment, it's satisfying. But I want you to call your attention to some brand new data that show that 93% of Americans hate it. 93%, more than 9 in 10 of Americans say the country is screwed up, we're too divided, and it's not right, and they don't like it. And I bet that's almost all of you, maybe every single one of you. Okay, so even though your itch is being scratched, you don't like it. Those are meth dealers in political ideology. They're not good. They're not good for America, and they're not good for you, so you need to declare your independence. You need to make a list of the people who are trying to manipulate you. Take your time, write it down, and then cross them off your list. Cut them out of your life. That's assignment number 1. If you're afraid to do that forever because you think that the other side is going to run rampant across America, then just do it for 2 weeks and see how it makes you feel. You're going to like it. Assignment number 1. Assignment number 2. You need to go in search of contempt. Now this is weird, right? Because contempt is bad, contempt is cancer. So you should avoid it, run away from it, right? Wrong. Last month I was in Utah at Brigham Young University, which is the flagship university of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called the Mormons. And you know, the thing about the Mormons that's really interesting is that almost all the young people, certainly almost all the students at Brigham Young University, they go on 2-year missions. They're missionaries, knocking on doors. Now, the hardest thing about being a missionary, if you're a Mormon or any faith, is the rejection. I mean, nobody wants a missionary on the porch, right? You don't want, unless you already have the faith, in which case you're like, have a sandwich. So I have a trick for missionaries so they don't have so much rejection. Only go to houses where people already have the faith. Well, that's idiotic, right? Because that defeats the purpose of being a missionary. The purpose of being a missionary is the conflict, is facing the rejection, right? That's you. You're the missionary. If you agree with these words that I'm saying, if you love your country and want to bring it together, you need to act. And the way that you need to act is to go look for the behavior you want to change, to stand up to the communication that you think is suboptimal. You need to go in search of contempt so that you can treat it with warm-heartedness. Now, tricky, isn't it? How do you do it? 2 suggestions. Number 1, go make more friends with people who disagree with you. The reason I love the Tocqueville program at Furman University is it's all about creating friendships between people who disagree. That is a model for America. This is on your campus. That's great. And you can be a little version of that. How? You don't have enough friends who disagree with you. I guarantee you, you don't have enough friends who disagree with you. Go make more friends. Go where people are not like you and make friends. And what do you do when you get there? Listen sincerely and respond with love. It's really hard. It's hard. It's because, you know, it's like, I don't care who you voted for president. If somebody disagrees with you, you do not want to listen to the reasons why that person did what they did. Listen sincerely and respond with love. That's how you do it, and it'll change your heart. It's amazing. You'll feel great. Takes courage. Second, participate more in social media, not less. I asked John Gottman. Remember John Gottman, my marriage counselor? Not my marriage counselor, the marriage counselor who was on my podcast? John Gottman, who talked about eye rolling and who predicted divorce. I asked him, how should we participate in social media? How should we communicate with each other? And he thought about it. He's a very, very visionary guy. And he said, you know, when I have a couple that's quarreling, the biggest problem that they have is they've lost the skills to communicate with each other. So I got to take them back to basics. So what he does is he takes a couple that's in counseling. And the weird thing, when couples are about to get divorced, all they can think of about each other is criticism. It's all they can think of, nothing but criticism. When you're first in love, you all know this, you all been in love. When you're first in love, you can't think of anything to criticize. It's like everything is peaches and cream, man. But when you're about to get divorced, all the good stuff is gone, there's nothing but bad stuff. Okay, so what John Gottman makes his couples do is walk around with notepads, I'm not kidding you. And they have to write down, every time they want to say a criticism, they have to write it down, right? And they can't say it until they've said 5 beautiful things to the other person, right? It's like, I want to yell at her because she didn't pick me up. She left me hanging there for 15 minutes, right? It's typical because she's always late. She's Spanish. All right, but I haven't hit my quota. So I got to say 5 things based in love that are complimentary. You know, I love that you made me dinner tonight, and it was delicious. You're I got to tell you, I am so happy that I come home and you're waiting for me. I love your mother. So, yeah, forget that one. So, by the time you get to number 5, the criticism has been forgotten. That's his point, right? Okay, so here's your social media rule, friends. If you want to say something critical about anybody for any reason at any time, you got to say 5 beautiful, loving things first. I am so grateful to be a student at Furman University. It's another beautiful day in Greenville, South Carolina. Gosh, I saw your post. It's so good. I love the passion in that. Whatever. 5 before 1 criticism. It will change hearts. You will be a different person. I guarantee you, the one heart you're going to change, yours. Will you lose friends? Yeah, the right friends to lose. You'll gain new friends. I guarantee this works. That's assignment number 2. Go in search of contempt and make it your friend because it is your opportunity to show warm-heartedness. Number 3. Gratitude. Remember my guy in Dallas? I wrote him back and said, thank you. Gratitude is the contempt killer. It neutralizes contempt on contact. There was a very interesting study from 2003. Researchers at the University of California, Santa Barbara, were asking undergraduates to make lists, ordinary lists. And he had 3 groups. One to talk about things that were bothering them. List of 5 things that are bothering you. One to make a list of 5 things, sort of current events. And one to make a list of 5 things that they were grateful for. 5 things you're grateful for in your life. You could do it right now, a list of 5 things that you're grateful for. Why were they doing that? They were doing basically a drug test, treatment and control. They wanted to see who was happier at the end of the experiment. Each Sunday night over 10 weeks, they would update their lists. Every day during the week, they would have to spend a few minutes looking at their lists. Right? At the end of 10 weeks, that gratitude listers were 25% happier than the others in the experiment. That's free, my friends. You can do that. You can make a gratitude list. You must make a gratitude list. You need to write it down and look at it every day and update it on Sundays, and you will be a happier person. This is a secret to a happier life. It's a secret to killing contempt as well, because you will fundamentally change the way that you see other people. There's a great book that everybody my age read and forgot, and everybody under 30 has never been asked to read but should. That's a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. He was a self-improvement writer from the 1930s. Generations of people read this book. It sold 30 million copies. Incredible book. It sounds like a guide to bend people to your will. It's not. It's a guide to beautiful ethical living. And he has a very easy research design. He goes all over the country finding very successful people and asks them their secrets to success. And he finds this guy. There's one chapter, it's my favorite chapter in the book, where Dale Carnegie, he goes to a magician in New York named Howard Thurston. It's in 1925. He was the most famous magician in the world at the time. He'd been for 40 years basically doing the same tricks, card tricks and rabbits out of hats and the whole deal. 8 shows a week. And Dale Carnegie wants to know why he's such a famous magician, why he's he's considered the greatest performer in the world at the time. His competition is Houdini, and this guy's considered a better performer. So he goes to see, why is he so great? It's not the tricks, it turns out. They're very ordinary. It turns out the reason is he's completely connected to his audience. Totally. He's laughing along with them. He's understanding what they're understanding. And this is the amazing thing to Dale Carnegie. How do you do that 8 shows a week for 40 years? That's what he wants to know. So he goes back afterward and says, Mr. Thurston, that was amazing. I understand the secret of your success. It's the connection you have with your audience. How do you do that? Howard Thurston says, it's simple. Every night before I go out on stage, I say these words to myself. I am grateful because these people come to see me. They make it possible for me to make my living in a very agreeable way. I'm going to give them the very best I possibly can. He said a meditation of gratitude, not to them, but to himself. And that changed him as a person. And then, here's the best part. Before he hit the footlights on the stage, under his breath, you know what he'd say? I love my audience. I love my audience. And it's showtime. That had a big impact on me when I read that. Big impact several years ago. So much so You know what I said before I came up here to say this speech? And it's true. I do love you. Why? Because I'm grateful to you. Because we're working together. Because we're all happy and nobody's suffering. Because this is a message that's positive and we have power and we're doing it together. That's why I love you. And that's why I'm grateful to you, because you gave me this opportunity. So here's my last thought, because now this is in your hands. My last thought for you. You know, there's a Catholic retreat center near my home. And my wife and I, we teach at this retreat center, we teach marriage preparation for engaged couples. We get 25 to 30 of them every month, and we go in and we teach them. And it's super fun. It's great. It's inspirational. I sometimes run into them, like in the airport or something. I say, "How's your marriage?" And a couple times, it's like, "Yeah, we left the thing and we broke up." And but here, that's not my point. Whether we're good teachers of marriage prep or not. At this marriage prep center, as you're leaving, so it's basically a church, and as you're leaving, there's a sign for the people who are going out to the parking lot. Not a sign when you come in; it's when you go out. It's over the door. You know what it says? You are now entering mission territory. So that's what I want you to imagine over these doors. Okay? If you agree with me that it's in our hands, if you're ready for a social movement to bring this country back together, if you're really ready to do that, then I want you to imagine there's a sign over these doors, and I want you to read it before you go out, because starting tonight and all this week and for the rest of the year, remember, you, my friends, and I are in mission territory. God bless you, and thank you. Are we taking questions? Are we doing questions? Are we doing questions? Okay. Sure, we'll do questions and answers. If you've got questions, I got answers. Yeah.
We have 20 minutes or so for questions, so who will begin? We have a tradition of beginning with a student. So
oh, great. And we have a mic, right? We have roving mics? All right.
Raise your hand. And yes.
Mm-hmm. It's been...
So you say in your forthcoming work that we need to avoid using ad hominem arguments.
Right.
And you praise Ronald Reagan, saying, never once did Reagan say that Jimmy Carter hated America or was a crook or wanted to see the American dream die. And that's all great. Once upon a time, Richard Nixon said, "I am not a crook." He then resigned in the wake of Watergate. Bill Clinton claimed that he did not have sexual relations with Monica Lewinsky, and then he got impeached, and so forth. Some claim...
And now he's like more famous than ever, so... yeah.
Some claim that Donald Trump sided with the Russians trying to rig the election. Others claim that Hillary is responsible for the deaths in Benghazi and did unscrupulous behavior with her emails. So my question for you is, how can candidates, and by consequence citizens, try to unite in friendship in light of these events? And I guess, are there cases where candidates truly are crooks, and can people call them out for that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, there are candidates who are crooks. There are people who are criminals. Ad hominem means that we make statements about other people's motivations, not that we make statements about people's actions. Right? Actions are actions, but you don't know what motivates people. To say, you did something crooked because you're a terrible person. You did something crooked because you want money that wasn't yours. That's the problem. See, this is what we do. There's nothing wrong with saying, this thing that you did, I disagree with. But there's something really wrong with saying, like, I disagree with who you voted for president. Maybe it's true I disagree with who you voted for president. Pretty much no matter who you voted for. No, I'm kidding. So the problem is if I say, I disagree with who you voted for president, and I really hate the reason you did it, and let me tell you why you did it. That's an ad hominem argument. And that's the problem that we have, right? We think we know what motivates our foes. We don't. We actually don't. There's a very interesting new poll from the Pew Research Organization that looks at what people actually know about the other side politically. And the answer is next to nothing. Next to nothing. It's funny, there was a polling political progressives asking, what percentage of voting Republicans earn $250,000 a year or more? Answer, 40%. It's 2.5%. We don't even know anything about the other side. Conservatives don't understand very much about liberals. Liberals don't understand very much about conservatives. Rural people don't understand very much about people who live in cities and vice versa. That's the problem. Learn more about people's motives. Call out actions. That's completely appropriate. Right. By the way, you should do that because disagreement is healthy in a republic where nobody's going to knock on your door and take you to jail like in China or like in Russia. You're not going to get arrested. Let it rip, man. Just don't say that you know why people did something when you actually didn't. And thank you for your great question. Thanks. All right, who's next? We got one right behind you there. Go ahead. All right, and then we're going to you next.
Thank you so much for your lecture. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So talking about going in search of contempt and trying to respond in love, but then a little bit after that you were talking about positive social media posts and saying, will you lose friends? Yes, but the right kinds of friends to lose. And my initial reaction was just sort of laughing, but then I guess I got hooked on that and sort of caught up thinking about that. So I'm wondering when, like, seeking contempt out versus sort of shaking the dust off your feet, so to speak, and moving on to a more positive interaction, like the right type of friends to lose. Can you elaborate on how to make that distinction and when to know which course to take?
That's a really sophisticated question. I appreciate it. It's good. The answer is I don't know. I don't know when this is a question of judgment. You know, when are you not going to be able to make progress? Is the whole idea. I mean, again, when you've got one interaction with somebody and it's contemptuous, that every single time that's an opportunity. But when you're in a dysfunctional relationship with somebody who under no circumstances will do anything but treat you with contempt, there's no reason for you to become a victim. And at a certain point, you got to avoid that. Right? I mean, basically, if you're in a social media relationship with somebody who's trolling you all the time, there's no reason for you to hang around. Maybe you should not follow that person. Maybe you should not pay attention to that person. But you got to make that judgment call. The problem that we have is that we get stuck on people who fire us up in a negative way, and we avoid people with the one-off interactions where we actually might have a consequence, where we could have a causal positive interaction with that person. We're doing exactly the opposite of what I'm talking about here. You had one follow-up? Yeah, I think so. You're going to have to make that decision, and each one of us has to make that decision. I certainly have. I've stopped kind of interacting with a lot of people over the last 5 years, 10 years. It's a good thing to do. It's a healthy thing to do too. But I'm in search of cases where I might be able to have an interaction that could be strangely positive. Who are the friends you're going to lose? People who don't think it's very fun that you're nice. And there are lots of people who really love it that you're like, yeah, you got something bad to say about somebody else? Come over here and sit next to me. Right? That's a natural human thing to do. You heard something bad about somebody else? That's, Schadenfreude. Bring it on. Right? But, I want to tell you about how much admiration I have for this third person. It's like, yeah, I got no time for that. Right? People are funny that way. But you need to be a generating force for that if we're actually going to change our culture. Thank you. Right here.
Yes. Kind of on the same point, going in search of more contempt in order to treat people with love who you disagree with and seeking out more people you disagree with in order to change your own heart. If you think about Aristotelian, like 1, 2, 3 levels of friendship, is that more utilitarian, or do you think there is a way to come to like that higher friendship?
Wow. This is great. This is great. This is a really good university. So, okay, so let me give you a quick primer on what she's talking about with friendship according to Aristotle. Okay, there's 3 kinds of friends. There's friendships of utility. That's like business relationships. It's like I got my distributor, the guy I work with in the next cubicle. It's good to get along. Is he my friend? Sure. Do I actually know where he grew up? No. Right? That's a friendship of utility. Slightly higher than that in virtue is a friendship of pleasure. You really like somebody because they give you pleasure. They're funny, they're beautiful, they're interesting, they're smart, they tell good jokes, right? That's a friendship of pleasure, and that's a good thing because you actually admire something about that. You're not using that person, you admire something about that person. Now the problem with those 2 levels of friendship is they come and go, right? I mean, if your friend is no longer funny, forget about it. If your friend is no longer your business partner, you probably never talk to him again. The highest level of friendship is one of virtue. It's the perfect friendship, according to Aristotle, where what? You both admire something that's better than the two of you. You both admire something that's good and true. It's a love for another person. It's for the perfect marriage is one where you share your loves for others, not just for each other. Love for God, love for your children, love for anybody. That's the perfect friendship. Okay, so the question is your friendship based on a common value? And if that's what's actually going on, if you're working you're creating friendships, and this is the beautiful thing about something like the Tocqueville program, because you're actually creating friendships around the idea of sharing ideas. The idea of being able to love each other while you disagree. That is a higher ideal. That is actually a shot at an Aristotelian perfect friendship. As a matter of fact, that's almost the perfect way to do it, isn't it? Is to find somebody with whom you don't admire particular qualities, like I agree with you on politics, and somebody who can't do something for you, but where you really want to dig into disagreement because you want to understand each other, and that love of the common understanding is per se the reward. That's a great way to do it. I've made so many friends this way, so many really good friends this way. This guy I do work with, a guy named John Powell at the University of California, Berkeley, and we have this little traveling road show. And John Powell is completely my opposite. He was, I'm center right. He's really, really very progressive. He's a civil rights activist from the 60s, right? He's a civil rights lawyer, as a matter of fact. He's kind of a militant, as a matter of fact. We completely, for one thing, the thing I care about the most is poverty. The thing he cares about the most is poverty. He wants to bring dignity to every life. So do I. And so working for that, we talk about how our differences share a common moral core around which revolve different ideas that can strengthen each other. As the Proverbs say, iron sharpens iron. And it's an Aristotelian relationship that we actually have on the basis of that. This is where you could find maybe the most profoundly inflecting relationships in your life. Maybe your spouse. Crazy. I've heard it done. All right, who's next? Go ahead.
I'd just like to know why Nathan, because just a couple years ago he was one of us, and now he's working for you. You're on a first engagements with the Dalai Lama. You know so much about humanity and the way people interact. What is it about him that's gotten him where he is now?
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, I ask myself that a lot. So like, why Nathan? I lay awake nights. Why Nathan? It's funny, when I have a research assistant, and I hire generally a new research assistant every 2 to 3 years. And when they're done, I like to hire people that want to be scholars, that share my values, that have impeccable credibility, background, skill, work ethic, and they want to be scholars. Now it's important because that's my background. I want somebody who I can mentor in a meaningful way, and so I go through a lot of resumes when I'm looking for. This is a great university, but they're all from great universities. There's somebody who's got a 4.0 in college. They all have a 4.0 in college or something, like are close enough rounded off, right? They all have good test scores. You want somebody who clearly is hungry, and Nathan's hungry. He's hungry for the truth. And he shares my values, and I met him, and I'm like, yeah, this is a guy who understands where I'm coming from, and he wants to actually parlay that into a life of a scholar who's morally going to try to change the lives of other people. So this is the key thing. It's funny, Nathan and I have this study. I don't know if some of you get my newsletter every 2 weeks. It's full of corny dad jokes and junk, but we also come to get the quirky studies that we can't use for anything else. We throw it in the newsletter. And there's one study this week that we put in our newsletter this last Sunday that showed that people have a tendency in a job interview to talk about skills and sort of desiccated job functions, what I can do. And they don't talk about the one thing that the boss really wants them to talk about, which is what's on their heart about the mission of the organization. It's like, so you're going into a job interview and you're interviewing there because you like the organization. You want to work for the Red Cross of Greenville, South Carolina, for example. Why? Because you really want to help people. But you're in there saying, I have good accounting skills, and I never come to work late. And what they really want to hear is that you have a love for people who are in need, that you have you have written on your heart a desire to alleviate suffering, and you've always admired the Red Cross for their ability to do it, and it's a dream of yours to be part of this mission. That gets you the job. That's what Nathan did. And that's what all of us who are in leadership positions, we need people who share our values. Secret to the job market. Thank you. I should be actually exerting leadership here and telling you where to go, but it's like,
Thank you for your really thoughtful remarks on
Thanks.
bringing America together. As a survivor of the Rwandan genocide, I've thought long and deeply about what reconciliation means, what repair looks like. And what we've learned in Rwanda is that reconciliation requires truth-telling. In fact, what we've learned is that truth and reconciliation is sequential, that you can't get to reconciliation without truth, because there is a restorative power in truth-telling. It's uncomfortable, it's difficult, but when we have the courage to engage in these kinds of conversations, the truth sets us free. And given that, how do you understand the legacy of this nation's history of racial and economic injustice and the injury that it's created, and what does reconciliation look like in that context?
That's a good question. And I would welcome your comments on this too. And amazing, the case of Rwanda. I mean, incredible, because it's a case of a country that in 1994 was lost forever. This is what we thought in the United States. Rwanda's lost forever. Civil war, genocide, permanent poverty in a part of the world that for anybody my age, the association that we have with a large part of sub-Saharan Africa is like famine because we haven't traveled enough. So under the circumstances, we said there's no future, but yet look at you, you're here. You're at Furman University in Greenville, South Carolina, because it's a success case study. Now, the problem doesn't go away, however. You notice that a genocide is a genocide. And the way that reconciliation does occur, in point of fact, is stating the truth, is talking openly about things. The best way not to have reconciliation is to sublimate the truth and to not have a conversation about difficult things. That's the best way never to reconcile. So you see the stewing anger and hatred between married couples that are not getting along. The main thing that John Gottman makes them do is they have to talk about the hard things. You had an affair. They have to say it, right? And the other person has to listen to it, and they have to talk about it, because reconciliation really is based on truth. Look, every country has its ghosts. Every country has its problems. Every country needs its reconciliation. There's a lot of things in the United States, not just the legacy of slavery. There's the legacy of the treatment of the Native Americans. There is the way that we have treated the poor in this country, the way that we have treated each other under many, many different circumstances. If you want reconciliation, you have to talk openly. Now, here's the key problem that we have in a lot of these cases, in the cases of the way that we talk about race in this country. Nobody wants to talk about it because it's a no-win situation. So that means that people have to talk openly about it, and other people have to listen openly about it. That's the key thing. It's not good enough to shout somebody down. See, the problem that we have in a lot of college campuses, we say, we have to talk openly about this to get reconciliation, and at the same time, identity politics says if you don't belong to a particular group, you can't have an opinion, you can't talk about it. Well, it's a catch-22, right? Let's talk openly. Let's say what we think. There's a chance at reconciliation under the circumstances, but we've gone too long in this country not talking about things that are really, really uncomfortable. We can handle it, man. Look, you're Rwandan. If you can handle it, we can handle it. Thank you. All right.
So there are two kind of competing points of view on debate. One, people like Ben Shapiro, who's Jewish, and says he never cites the Bible when he's talking to someone who disagrees, because that other person might not share Judeo-Christian values. And then I listened to Dr. Lopez give a talk where he made the point that we should base arguments on all aspects of where we come from, because otherwise we may come to a standstill, but we'll never convince the other person if we don't cover the Bible. You'll never convince a Christian of something if their views are based on the Bible, and you never talk about it. So,
Right.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I love that question, and I'll tell you why. People often ask, what are you going to do about identity politics? What are we going to do about identity politics? What is identity politics? Identity politics is describing yourself or another person with respect to one characteristic. That's how identity politics works, right? Now, the reason it's inherently polarizing is because it's saying, here's who I am, and therefore here's who you're not. Here's my castle, you can't get in. Or even worse, I'm going to tell you who you are with respect to one dimension. You're not one-dimensional, Caleb. I'm not one-dimensional either. See, here's the thing. Identity politics reduces people and therefore creates division. What we need is something richer than that, which is telling stories about us, about ourselves, in which we maintain the high dimensionality of each person. I respect the high dimensionality. The Caleb has this, and this that I know about, and these other 5 things that I don't know about, and I want to know about, because in so doing, we tell a story that unites us together, right? Unites us. You're not just Rwandan. You're not just at Furman University. You're a human being with feelings. You have a lot of things in common with me. We have more in common that we have that are differences, and therefore we can have a conversation on anything because we're united. This is the key thing. So when you're using religion as a way to alienate other people and to say who they're not and to say who you are, you're doing it wrong. When you're using your religion to say, here's who I am, you can relate to this, and it's okay if you don't have these particular characteristics because you've told a story, then it's inherently uniting. You have to decide which one you're doing. Now, here's the acid test. It's really about values, things that you value, right? You don't talk about yourself and identity politics with something you don't value, right? I mean, maybe you kind of grew up a Chicago Cubs fan, but you don't really care about it. You don't put that on your Facebook page, right? That's an element of identity that's unimportant. It's only things that are important to you, things that are valued, okay? You can either use your values as a weapon or you can use them as a gift. A gift is something that you share with other people. A weapon is something that you use to hit somebody over the head and alienate them. So ask yourself this. Am I using my political views? Am I using my religion? Am I using my race as a weapon, or am I using it as a gift? And only you can decide that. If it's the former, you're doing it wrong. If it's the latter, you're doing it right. Peyton, the doctor, future doctor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Brooks, for your remarks. I've recently heard many leaders, both political, religious, cultural, use perceived differences in moral values with the other side to justify the advance of a cause by any means necessary, including contempt. Do you believe that our culture, in order to move past contempt into love, needs to develop a unified understanding, a unified moral value system, or not? And if so, what would that be?
Okay, first part of the question. What's your name here again? Your name is Thomas? Okay, hand the mic to Thomas. Okay, Thomas, question, quiz, extra credit. Peyton's first part of the question is about people who assume the motives of other people to justify any means necessary. What's wrong with that? What's wrong with assuming that, saying that your motives are the reason that I can fight you by any means necessary?
Because that's an ad hominem fallacy.
Because it's an ad hominem fallacy, because I don't know your motives, right? That's a power play. That's basically, you said one thing, excellent. A for the day. He actually even used the Latin. That's really good. Okay, that's good. Now, what that means is that I'm not going to take what you said on his face because it doesn't give me enough power. I'm going to endow it with motivation, even motivation that might not be there, so I have extra power, and in so doing, I can oppose you with more vigor. Now, why? Why am I going to do that? Because you probably just said something relatively innocuous, and I want to say the real reason you said that is because you're a racist. The real reason you said that is because you're a hater. It's because you hate conservatives. You know, that's the real reason you said that. And therefore, I'm going to oppose you by any means necessary. The whole first part of the argument is off, right? Because you've done something you're not supposed to do. Second part of your question is?
So do we need a shared set of values?
Okay. So We do share lots and lots of values. One of the things I talk about in this new book is how much that we actually share in values, and it's just almost everything. Here's the amazing thing. What we're doing wrong in this country is that we're mistaking means for ends. We're mistaking the means to meet moral ends with the moral ends themselves. I mean, Democrat or Republican, it's all means, right? It's all means to get to common ends, things that we mostly care about. It's amazing. And again, the ad hominem fallacy is classic. I talk to conservatives all the time, and they say, the problem with Democrats? The problem with liberals? They want to subjugate poor people and keep them voting Democrat forever. I've heard it a million times. I have never heard a liberal say that, ever. It's wrong, right? But that's an ad hominem. That's an argumentum ad hominem, right? The same thing is true about how we, when liberals, they talk about conservatives, and they say, the conservatives, why they want tax cuts? So that their buddies like Charles Koch can pay less in taxes. I have never heard somebody like Charles Koch ever say, I just want to pay less in taxes. They actually don't care. I mean, nobody likes to pay taxes, but for Pete's sake, that's not the motivation. They got the motivations all wrong. The key thing for us to understand is that when you actually do public opinion polling about the motivations that people have for public policies in this country, they're pretty much the same on two dimensions: fairness and compassion. Fairness and compassion. We basically all want a society. Now, we don't all define fairness in the same way. Some want more redistribution, some want more rewards to merit and all that stuff. But we all want a fair and just society, and we all want good treatment for other people, particularly those who are vulnerable. We want to treat people who are weak better than we currently do. The question is how you do it. So let's agree that fairness and compassion are something that we're revolving around, and then let's agree to disagree and to understand each other and have a conversation in a spirit of love and warm-heartedness and compassion with each other about the different ideas that we have. Because what we need in this country is a competition of ideas to get at these common moral ends. We need to compete with each other, because if we have a monopoly, like any monopoly in human history, whether it's economic or democratic, whether there's one candidate on the ballot or one product on the shelves, that is the recipe for stagnation and mediocrity. Competition brings excellence. And so when you believe something, go to somebody who disagrees with you, because you're more likely to get more excellent under the circumstances. And that's what we need to do. Revolve around compassion and fairness, and then find people who disagree with us so that we can become truly excellent in meeting those goals together. Thank you.